Hello there, and welcome to In the PI Seat, the podcast where we discuss the career choices of different researchers, and in particular their transition from postdoc to PI. I am your host, Camilla Valenzuela, and today we have Charlotte Odendahl, a Sir Henry Dale Fellow at King's College London. Hi Charlotte, welcome to the show.
Hello, I'm very happy to be here. Thank you so much.
I'm very happy to have you here. So, Charlotte is a Sir Henry Dale Fellow at King's College London, and she actually works on two of my favorite bacterial pathogens. So that's a coincidence / not a coincidence.
Maybe this is what brought us together.
Yeah, pretty much. But it's so good to have you here. This show is based on the idea of how people transition from postdoc to PI, and then how you start a group and how you make it happen, basically. Really the exact training that we get while doing the PhD, the postdoc, and blah, blah. But it's something that I'm really fascinated about. I would like to start by you giving us a run through your career so far. So where did you study? What did you study in university, and so on and so
Sure. I was born in Germany, but I'm French. Let's start with the beginning. So I'm French, and I moved to London for school, actually, when I was 14. And then I stayed in London for my undergraduate studies, and I went to Imperial College, where I studied biochemistry, which was a bit of a challenge because I didn't speak English very well at the time. But I studied biochemistry there, and then I stayed at Imperial. I did a master's in biochemical research where I rotated in 3 different labs. And maybe we'll discuss the topics of these rotations because they were heavily influenced by my interest in cellular microbiology already. And then I did a PhD on Salmonella pathogenesis with David Holden. And I moved to Boston afterwards at Harvard to do a postdoc in innate immunity with John Kagan. So I was absolutely fascinated by host pathogen interactions. And up until my postdoc, I had mostly worked on the bacteria. And so I really wanted to become more proficient in the host. And so I did a postdoc in innate immunity, and I learned a bit of immunology in Boston as well. And so with that dual training, that allowed me to then open a lab on host bacteria interactions at King's College London with a fellowship. So I can explain maybe later down the line what these are. And so I've been there for a few years now, and I'm very happy.
Wonderful. I'm already interested by your rotations. Mm-hmm. What did you do during the rotations in the master's?
So basically what I wanted to come to is that my undergraduate degree was for 3 years. And so when I started my undergrad, I was fascinated by biology. I already knew this was going to be a career for me. But then I was quite disappointed because across my 3 years of studies, I couldn't find any topic that I particularly fell in love with. I was convinced I wanted to do neuroscience. That didn't work out for me, or genetics. But then in the final course of my final year, I took a course on host pathogen interactions taught by Gordon Dugan. And so this is when I absolutely found basically my calling and what I was fascinated about. And I did a rotation in a lab working on phagocytosis. Maybe we can discuss this later afterwards as well. And then basically I found a master's program at Imperial, which would give you 3 different rotations in different labs. And so this is when I think my personality came through already, is because I didn't really like any of the rotations proposed. And I went to seek out labs that worked in host bacteria interactions. And I went to ask them if they would join the program so I could do a rotation in their lab. So this is how I ended up doing 3 rotations on 3 labs that worked on type 3 secretion, because I thought this was absolutely fascinating. I still do. So I did a rotation in a plant pathogen with the type 3 secretion system, which was super fascinating. I did a rotation with David Holden, whose lab I ended up joining as a PhD student. And then I did a rotation with Gadi Frankel as well, working on EPEC. But most of these labs actually weren't part of the program, and I sort of pushed it to happen.
Wow, that's amazing. It really shows that you're really...
Well, there's positives and negatives.
Yeah, of course. No, with everything. But it really shows that you're like, if you want something, you go
Oh
for
yes,
it,
I think this is
and you're not
yeah,
afraid to
yeah, this
ask.
is a good
You know?
description. And yes, that also means that sometimes you're not, you ruffle a few feathers, but I guess that's the price to pay.
Yeah, I also think that there is nothing more dangerous in science or in life in general than saying, this has always been done like
Hmm.
this, so we're gonna keep it
Absolutely.
like this, you know. So anyway, I'm behind you in that. And so, how did you decide to choosing one of the three labs to then do a PhD? Why did you choose David
So
Holman?
there wasn't any. So part of a lot of the PhD programs now have a rotation system with 3 rotations for a year, and then you join one of the labs. So this wasn't the case. So there wasn't any lab I needed to choose between the three, but just the rotation with David Holman went really well, and he offered
Okay.
me a position as a PhD student. And I really loved my project there. I was combining microbiology, as well as I was working on a project which I continued for my PhD, which studied actin manipulation by salmonella. And this was exactly what I wanted to do, so I decided to go there.
And then, what made you move across the Atlantic?
Um,
Besides, like you could have done something like in the host pathogen, like in the host side, there are labs everywhere. So why did you choose that particular one?
um, I don't know if I actually chose the lab for the reasons I'm going to say, but in retrospect, these were really good reasons. Um, so first thing, like I said before, I wanted to learn about the host. So this was something that I really wanted to do, and this was a very strong innate immunity lab, or at least a very strong PI in innate immunity. So I wanted to learn that. Second of all, the lab was based at Harvard, and that is always something that is appealing for everyone. And having worked there for 6 years, this is a choice I do not regret because it was a super stimulating environment. You have in the sort of area around the Harvard Medical School, you have like hundreds of labs. You have tons of expertise in many different areas of research, and it was a very stimulating and environment where I learned a lot. And then the third reason why this was a good choice, even though I wasn't completely sure at the time, is that I joined a lab that was less than 2 years old. And so basically, I was joining the lab of a superstar young PI, John Kagan, who hadn't published yet as a PI. And as I was coming, some people were already leaving, and basically, we were starting over with two PhD students. And at first, I wasn't completely sure that this wasn't a dangerous choice, and I'm really happy I made that choice. This is like probably the best decision I made in my career because again, working with a young PI who was super hungry, incredibly smart. It was again a very stimulating environment. We had tons of ideas every second. We were trying to do different things and new things all the time. And I completely recommend PhD students to consider doing a postdoc into a very young and starting lab. And actually, I think it's also a good idea to do a PhD in a very young lab. So I combined a PhD in a sort of more established lab where I learned a lot with a postdoc in a very young lab where I learned a lot of different things. So it was really great to combine these two.
Okay. Oh, that's fascinating. Do you think that also maybe the fact that you, at that stage in your life, in your career, you were able to kind of observe how a young PI starts their own lab helped you in some way? Because it's very different from when you're going from a very established lab to starting your own lab. It might feel a bit like, oh, but then actually, how do I do
Yeah,
this?
that's a good point. Yeah, yes, I do feel that I do feel that it helped me because yes, at two different levels. One, I saw how a young lab was operating, even though it's in a different country. So the grant system is different, and the different deadlines that you need to go through as you're moving forward in your career are different. The grants you're eligible for as a young PR are going to be different. So that didn't match, but at least seeing how a young PI was starting the lab was absolutely helpful. That also meant that as I was starting my lab, my PI was only 6 to 8 years removed from starting his own lab. So he was incredibly helpful. He could still remember all of the different steps. So he was incredibly helpful with me, helping me secure my position or my first grant, and especially getting our first paper published. He like really helped me because basically when you're corresponding author for the first time in your life, you have no idea what you're doing. So he was incredibly helpful with that. And I guess if somebody is a bit younger and has done this more recently, they kind of remember what it's like a bit more.
Okay, so One thing that I would like to hear about you is like, what was your biggest influence to first start your scientific career and then to actually stay there?
Yes, thank you very much for asking this question. So as I mentioned, I did my PhD with David Holden and my postdoc with John Kagan, and I want to highlight them because they have taught me everything I know about being a scientist. But today I wanted to highlight several women that have been important influences in my research career. And the first one is Emmanuelle Caron, who was my first project supervisor. So I did my as part of my undergraduate degree, the last 6 weeks of your final year are a lab project. And so I did my project in the lab of Emmanuelle Caron, working on phagocytosis and inflammation. And this is when this was like the aha moment where I knew that this is what I was meant to do. And Emmanuelle was a like super important influence even before she was my teacher. Before that, she was also a good friend. I'm saying was because sadly she passed when I was finishing my PhD in 2009, where we were in the same department. So she was very important in starting a science career, and she was a big influence, a direct influence on my research career. I also had a very important indirect influence on, thinking that being a scientist for a woman is possible. And this is somebody, this is Pascal Cossard. And so, as I mentioned earlier, I didn't really like any of my undergraduate teaching until the final year when we learned about host pathogen interactions. And so I learned about all of these fantastic scientists who were all men. And then there was this name Pascal with an E at the end. So I assumed this was a woman, Pascal Cossard, who was not only, playing the game quite strongly with all these guys, but she was actually queen of all of this big club of cellular microbiology and one of the leading members and leading founders of the field of cellular microbiology. So I was super inspired reading her work and even like finding some lectures online. And first, I found that her work was fascinating, but also I think it was a big eye-opening thing for me to see that a woman and a mother could have a super successful scientific career. So indirectly, Pascal had a bit indirect influence at first, and then later down the line, she became that positive, like direct influence as well. Always being encouraging to pursue projects and research, etc. And then later down the line, my biggest influence to stay in academia is Sophie Hélène. So Sophie was a postdoc in David's lab when I was a PhD student, and then she stayed to start her lab at Imperial. She's now at Harvard. And so we remained good friends throughout the years. And I don't know if it's the case for a lot of people, a lot of women, but for me, I had a lot of sort of negative messages from a lot of people telling me that, if I started a family, I couldn't have a research career. If I got married, this was done for me in science, that I hadn't done enough or whatever. And Sophie was that opposite positive influence. She's also a mother. She's got 4 children. She always directly pushed me to, whenever I felt that I wasn't good enough or whatever, always directly pushed me to apply for fellowships, to apply for funding, to send papers to big journals. Always like being basically a life coach, both by telling me directly that pushing me directly to do things, but also showing by example that being a successful scientist and a mother is absolutely possible. So it was important for me to mention these people.
I think we all need a Sophie in our lives to really push us.
Yes, as somebody who tells you like absolutely do it. Just don't listen to these people. Just do it. Just do it.
Yeah. You want to do it? Do it. Like the worst thing that can happen is that they tell you no, but at least you did it.
Yes, exactly. So no nonsense. Just
that's
do
wonderful. Okay, so now I would like to go back a little to what you say that you have a fellowship position. What exactly does that mean? And how does it work?
So it's a very English system. So basically, when you start your lab in the UK, in academia, there's 2 different paths. And one is through the lectureship academic track. So you get a job as a lecturer, which means that some of your time will be dedicated to teaching. Usually it's protected at the beginning, but eventually you end up spending 20% of your time on teaching and 80% on research. You have a contract with the university, so the university pays you. And then you secure your sort of lab funding through external grants. So, for example, from the Medical Research Council or for the Wellcome Trust or other avenues. But you're paid by the university. And so there's a parallel track where you are joining a university as a fellow, but the university doesn't pay you. You secure your own salary through another grant. So these are called fellowships. And so they are available for early career fellows. So as you set up your group, you're eligible for early career fellowships, or they are called sometimes career development awards. And so these are fairly long, so they're longer than grants. So that's regular grants. So that's quite nice. So they're 5 years. At least this is what they were at the beginning. 5 years. You get your own salary paid on that, and then usually you get money for a postdoc, and then generous consumable funding for 5 years. And an advantage of that is that the university doesn't pay you, which means that you are not really meant to be teaching. So it's always very nice to, since our colleagues do a lot of teaching, it's nice to be able to help them with tutorials and the occasional lecture and supervising students, but you are much less asked to do teaching, at least early on. And the other thing is that since you are not paid by the university, but you are paid by the fellowship, by your own grants, that means that you can move to another institution if you want. So you're completely free to take your fellowship and go to another place if you wanted to do that. So this is what I got. I got a Sir Henry Dale Fellowship from the Wellcome Trust. This was a 5-year fellowship. Now Wellcome is changing the way that they fund young PIs, and now their fellowships are 8 years. And with that, on top of your salary, you can ask for 4 members of staff. So it's a really amazing way to start your lab in the UK with fellowships such as these.
And out of curiosity, what happens after the years of the fellowship? Like how?
Yeah, that's an excellent question because this is the biggest downside of the fellowship. So that's an excellent question. So again, this has changed. So Wellcome was probably the biggest funder of fellowships, and after the original sort of early career fellowship, you would apply for a senior fellowship. So this is going to get another 5 years of funding, and I think at that time you can ask for 2 postdocs, and I think you can ask for that twice. So you would be funded by the Wellcome Trust, for example, for 15 years. So the university is very happy with you because they haven't had to pay you for all that time. The problem with that is that if you didn't get your senior fellowship, some institution would just basically kick you out and they wouldn't support you. Which isn't very nice. So a lot of universities do that. I don't think it's good because you've had a successful fellow working for free for you for 5 to 10 years, and then not supporting them afterwards isn't great. So things have changed now, at least for the one I know, which is Wellcome. When you get your 8-year fellowship now at Wellcome, the university, basically when you apply for it, the university has to commit to give you a job after those 8 years. So there is some security for you afterwards, which is great. Before that, some institutions, such as King's College London, where I work, were already taking some steps to take care of their fellows. And so what we used to do at King's, and we still do for other fellowship schemes, and I went through that, is that in the 4th year of your fellowship, you go through a panel interview. You basically write a little research proposal plus plans for teaching at the university. You go through a panel, and then following that evaluation, you get an academic post, which is subject to probation, but at least you enter the academic track again. So this is a way to sort of feed back into the regular traditional academic track following your fellowship. Not all the universities do that, but King's take care of their people, so they do that.
That's great. Okay, so it really depends on where you are.
Yeah. In some universities, some of the more ruthless ones, you don't get your fellowship renewed, you're out, and it's not easy.
Yeah, that's not great. Then, how did you decide to go to King's? Like, did you apply for the fellowship, or did you apply for the fellowship in a specific place?
So this is an interesting story actually, because I actually sort of ended up at King's accidentally. So originally, when I wanted to start my lab, I was a little bit hesitant and I wasn't sure I could do it. And I felt it would be more comfortable or less scary if I went back to my PhD institution, to Imperial, where I would be in my old department with my old PI, with my friends, and it felt a little bit less scary. So I applied with Imperial to 2 of these fellowships, one from the MRC, the Medical Research Council, and one from the Wellcome Trust. And so these are a fairly long process. First, you write a pretty extensive proposal, and then a few people get shortlisted for an interview, which is a very tough interview. It's a 5-minute presentation followed by 20 minutes of questions from people from very different backgrounds. And then they select a few to get a fellowship. And unfortunately, despite the fact that I had got shortlisted for both interviews were on the same day. I didn't sleep at all the night before. I didn't do a very good job, and I didn't get any of these fellowships with Imperial. So I was kind of desperate to find something else because I wanted to come back to London at that point. And I was looking for smaller fellowships that some of the universities have. So, for example, Imperial does one of them, which is called a Junior Research Fellowship, where you get your a bit of independence, a bit of funding, and it gives you time to apply for fellowships. And I saw that that King's College had one of these fellowships. This was a 2-year fellowship. It's called the King's Prize Fellowship. That gave you 2 years of funding, some salary funding, some consumables, and even a member of staff to work with you. And the only downside to it is that I had to find a sponsor. So you basically need to find somebody like a head of department to sponsor you for the fellowship. And the head of department for the Department of Infectious Diseases was a professor called Michael Malem. And I recognized that name because he was the person who had interviewed me for the Wellcome Fellowship like 2 months before, who had looked pretty angry during my entire presentation, who had asked me really tough questions, and he didn't seem to like my project at all. And in fact, I didn't get that fellowship. So I was like, oh, well, okay. So, but I was pretty desperate at that point, to be honest. And also, to be fair, the department was a great fit. So it was mostly a virology department, but they worked on had great expertise on antiviral cytokines called interferons, which I wanted to work on. So it worked in theory very well, except for the person I had to contact to be my sponsor. So it took a lot of courage for me to send that email. And basically, because I thought, if this guy didn't want to, give me the welcome money to work at Imperial, why would he want to give me some King's money to work in his department? So I thought I had nothing to lose. At worst, he was going to laugh in my face or never respond to me. I wasn't really expecting a response, to be honest. And so I was really pleasantly surprised to get a response, very positive and encouraging response. A few hours later, I remember it was Thanksgiving Day, so we were celebrating already. And yeah, so I ended up, applying for the fellowship there with Mike Malem as my sponsor. And he's been my boss for 6-7 years now, and he's been incredibly supportive. So this is just a lesson to sometimes, if something is scary, it's still worth trying.
That's a great story.
Oh man, seriously, when I sent that email, I was convinced this was a terrible thing, and that I was going to get maybe like some insults in return. No, it was completely worth it.
Yeah, I know. Oh, that's amazing. So you were still in Boston when you were applying to go back to the UK?
Originally, yes, yeah. No, that's right. I was in Boston.
Did you have also because you're French? Did you particularly wanted to come back to Europe for family reasons, for example?
Yes, exactly. So I thought, 6 years in the US was enough. I felt that if I started my lab in the US, I would be stuck for another long time. Because I felt like if I was, hosting PhD students or supervising postdocs, I didn't want to start my lab in the US and then eventually leave. So I didn't want to make that commitment to stay in the US. So I was mostly looking to come back to Europe, yes, for family reasons, like you said, yeah.
Now, then, I would like to ask you on the actual transition to starting a lab. For you, what was the most challenging part of starting it? Was it the research problem, or was more how you start a lab, basically?
So I'm assuming it's going to depend on depend on how much funding you have when you start, how much you can bring from your lab in terms of reagents and ideas and questions that you want to address. So I started with that small King's Prize Fellowship, which wasn't a ton of money. I thought in the end it turned out to be completely fine, but I was really afraid of spending my money at the time because it's the first time you actually have to worry about your budget. So I ended up being super frugal when I didn't need to. And then, so basically, the first thing I had to do when I got my small fellowship is to, get more preliminary data to write a better welcome fellowship. So this is what I spent the first year doing, and I was finishing a paper I started in my postdoc at the time. And so then quite quickly, I ended up getting a Wellcome Fellowship with the support of King's. I had a nice budget, so that wasn't a concern anymore. I don't know, I guess the biggest challenge was to start recruiting students. It took me a while to get students in the lab, to get a really good momentum, to get the research going. Because basically, when you're a postdoc, you do like a million experiments a day, everything is working great. And then when you pack up all of your stuff, put it in boxes, and move across the Atlantic, like all of that momentum stops. Everything like shrinks to a halt. You have to reorder like pipettes and tips and everything, and it's just a very, very slow and frustrating starts. And so it took us a while to get really good momentum and to get some really nice experiments going. I don't know if it's addressing your question very well, because I didn't really see any other big challenges.
Yeah,
Apart from the shift in momentum is frustrating.
yeah, I imagine. And I'm actually interested in like the student mentorship stuff. So did you get a chance to mentor, for example, master students or rotation students during your postdoc?
So yes, not master students, but yes, rotation
Okay.
students. And so this was at Harvard. So postdocs were not asked to supervise PhD students. PhD students at Harvard are super experienced. They're incredibly smart. They know exactly what they're doing, and they don't really need supervision. We did supervise rotation students, who again were so incredibly amazing that they didn't need a lot of supervision, just a little bit of guidance. And they were, very smart, very capable, sometimes overconfident students. So there were some challenges in supervising them for me, but they didn't really need that much help, to be honest. And so this is in contrast with the students in London, who I think are going to be probably 6 to 8 years younger than the Harvard students we had. And so the supervision is very different. They need a lot more guidance. Some of the master students we get in London, they haven't even held a pipette ever in their life, so we have to teach them. So we do serial dilutions with just Congo Red to go to the basics. So it's a very different, but at the same time, maybe a bit more rewarding, because you can see people who really didn't know how to do anything go from being super beginners to being fairly competent and sometimes very good independent researchers in the space of a few months. So that's probably a bit more rewarding.
Yeah, but it's true that depending on the country, the students that you get are quite
Yes.
different. In the place you are right now, you need to approach your mentoring in more hands-on, let's say. How do you handle like adapting to each individual student as they come?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely excellent question. So in the questions to think about was like some tips for future PI. So if you don't mind, I'm going to jump to that already. So the most important thing I have learned, being a group leader for a few years, is that everybody is different, and that they are different to you as well. And so they not everybody needs the same mentoring, and it's not necessarily going to be the mentoring that you received as a student or as a postdoc. So it's very important to adapt to what everybody needs. So that might mean that somebody needs a weekly meeting, while somebody else needs a bit more freedom to do their own thing for a couple of weeks before they meet with you. Some people are going to ask you questions all day long. Some people really start to get frustrated if you get too close to what they're doing on a day-to-day basis, and they really need that freedom. So I guess the most important thing is to try and be cognizant of that and adapt to everyone's needs. Otherwise, if people are unhappy, no one does good work anyway. So it's in everyone's interest to adapt to everyone.
Oh, that's wonderful. Okay, so now let's focus on something like really positive. What would you say that has been the most rewarding experience of this whole process so far? Could be science, could be
Of
something
being
else,
a
but
PI,
mm-hmm.
publishing a big paper was nice. And what was nice, so we published a big paper last year, but what was particular about that paper is that it was a team paper. So this was a project that was started by our first two master students in the lab. So the first two rotation students, they did the first experiments that ended up being figure one of the paper. And then one of my first students ended up being first author, with a postdoc being co-first author. I did a lot of experiments. We had another postdoc who did a lot of work on it. So it was a big team contribution. So when it was eventually accepted and published, it was I felt it was a lab celebration. And and it was really rewarding to have that team spirit. Also, as part of the paper, like I started by saying, we started with 2 master students, but then this ended up being the project that rotation students would pick up. So we ended up having 12 master students as authors on this paper. So it was really nice to sort of share that experience with all of these people. And what was great is that after the paper was published, we sort of got invited to present our work in Hawaii with the student and postdoc. So we went to Hawaii to celebrate that. So we worked hard, but then we played hard and partied in Hawaii. So that was pretty rewarding too.
That's wonderful. So 12 master students. Wow.
Yes, something we were very proud of.
That's a lot. Yeah, no, that's amazing. Not everyone recognizes the work of the master students or even the rotation students. So that's wonderful that they were all
Yeah, they
included.
did good work.
For how long you were working on that paper?
It was a solid 4 years with a lot of people working
Wow.
together. Yeah, maybe even more from like the first experiment to publication. So yeah, that was a long team
Amazing.
effort. Yeah.
Long run. Yeah, no, that's amazing. And you mentioned that you were doing
Yeah.
experiments back then. Are you still doing experiments
I'm
now?
not. This was the last experiments I did with for the revision. So I did the Western blot. I'm still the reigning Western blot queen of the lab. I'm waiting for the day that I get replaced as the Western blot queen, but I, I still call myself the Western queen. So this is very different to most people. This Western blots are my favorite experiment.
Oh, they are my
I
least favorite one, for
know.
sure. I don't know why.
Some of my happiest moments were in the dark room or in front of the image font, imaging Western blots. They just make me very happy.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. Have you had to deal like with problems during your time as a PI so far?
Yes.
Okay. What is your approach? Because I think it's very different when there's someone else above you
Hmm.
than when it's you, like the face
Hmm.
of the thing. Like, how do you approach dealing with those things?
Well, it's really interesting you say that because actually, when I had some problems, every time I actually went to seek advice from my head of department or any PI that had more experience than me. So even though you're the group
Hmm.
leader, there are still people you can talk to for advice or for mentorship or even like it's important to sometimes if the problems become big to actually have the head of department involved and maybe mediate some situations. So my approach has been to not think I can do it myself if I, because I'm still very young and new to this, and I'm going to assume that somebody who's got 10 to 20 years of experience on me might be able to help me. So whenever I had things I wasn't sure of, or maybe some conflicts between people in the lab or with me or whatever, I always want to get some advice from more senior people than me in the department, and it's been incredibly helpful. So I would probably advise to do that for sure. And then obviously the biggest thing to do is to talk. So whenever we've had some issues with students or whatever, my head of department helped me, and we setting up some conversations. So to really discuss whatever problems there were, so they wouldn't fester, and try and fix these problems basically by communication.
Those two are like, I think, the most important pieces of advice. Do you have anything else that you'd like to leave for future PIs?
Important tips for future PIs? Yes, and this is apart from everybody's different. Another really important thing, I think, in probably all aspects of life, but maybe in our jobs, is not to try to stay too comfortable. If you're comfortable, you don't learn. If you put yourself in an uncomfortable position, this is when you are forced to basically swim and learn. So if you're scared, I think it's okay to be scared to be a PI. It's okay to be scared to send a paper to a big journal, to send your grant to a big institute. I think everybody gets scared, but you just have to do it anyway, basically. And I think we all get scared. Just do it anyway. Basically, is the advice.
Yes. So now for like random
Okay.
stuff. I think you do some unconventional also stuff outside of the lab, right?
I did anyway. Yeah.
What do you like to do in your free time, or like a random thing that will nobody would expect from you?
I don't know. You know what? I don't know if they wouldn't expect it from me. But so during my actually most of my life, I did martial arts. I did judo when I was a child, and then a lot of Chinese kickboxing as a PhD student. So I got a black belt. Um, Actually, the month that I defended my
Wow.
PhD, I got a black belt in Chinese kickboxing, and then I did a lot of taekwondo during during my postdoc. I haven't done much of that since I became a mom and since COVID, but this is a fantastic outlet to for any frustrations. Like punching things is good.
Oh, that's amazing. I think that should be almost a requisite in people's life. Like there should be like a physical outlet.
Yes, so today I don't do a lot of punching. Actually, I still have a bag on my roof, which I sometimes hit. But if you get stressed, if you get frustrated, the best thing to do is to not dwell on it and start doing some dwelling on it is fine, but just going in doing some exercise. So today, I do go for hikes or runs in nature. That brings me a lot of peace. So I like being outside, and going to nature is good.
Nature is good, indeed. So you mentioned that you are a
Yep.
mom. Did you have your kids during your either postdoc or PhD?
I had my first son when I was a postdoc, so I was 4 years into my postdoc. So actually adopted that child, and I was on maternity leave during the paper revisions. And the paper I think came out the day I came
Oh,
back to work. So that was nice. But yeah, so first child during postdoc, and then I had twins like a year after I started my fellowship. So I have a 9-year-old son and
wow.
4-year-old twins.
Wow. Wow. And how did you balance that with finishing the paper and then starting your own lab?
Yeah, well, I'm not going to say it's easy.
What would you say that's the most important thing?
Well, the most important thing you don't control. The most important thing is to have a very supportive husband, wife, or partner. Uh, this is, I think it's impossible to do without like somebody supporting you on your side. And I was really lucky to have a very supportive husband. And it is super encouraging of my career. Whenever I have any success at work, he gets super excited. It's very sweet. So I think this is the most important thing. And then I think when you become a parent, you learn how to be organized. So when I was, single and carefree, I used to spend really long days in the lab, but I wasn't necessarily achieving much. So and then when I started to have to be home at a reasonable time to either see my husband or then see my family, I learned how to really organize my time. And it's absolutely possible to get everything done in a much shorter space of time if you get organized. So you can have very reasonable work days and not necessarily have to work much on weekends if you just spend the time every beginning of the week to plan your week really well. So you know where you need to be at any time. You know that when you have some time off from an experiment because you're incubating something, you can do something else. You make sure that every hour of your day is planned so that you don't end up staying late because you forgot to do something or there's something you haven't taken into account. So it requires some effort and actually some time. You have to spend the time to save some time during the week, and it's a discipline that I think people need to go through. But in the end, it's completely worth it because then you end up saving a lot of time and making your family happy at this in the meantime. Yeah.
Yeah, and also probably during your planning of the week, you need to prioritize. Like there is stuff that can be delegated, and there is stuff that absolutely needs you.
Oh,
So
absolutely. And
that I imagine is part of the yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, of course. I mean, as a postdoc, usually you kind of do your project on your own. So I was good friends as a postdoc with another postdoc who was a father, and he started work much earlier, and I finished a bit later. So we would help each other. He was incredibly helpful
Mm.
with me when if I needed to go or whatever. So having a little bit of a team spirit always helps. Sometimes you start an experiment, and the last time point is just removing the media and freezing the cells or fixing the cells. So if you have if people helping each other, um, it's always going to be positive for everyone in the lab for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, and that goes back. Like I feel like it's a theme of this podcast at the end that it's really showing how we are not really the cartoon of the like the scientist working alone in a
Mm.
basement. We really require a team around us to really move forward, and the team spirit for me is like the most important thing.
It's not just that you require it; is that it's like there's no point. there's no celebration if you're going to
Hmm.
do it on your own. It's much more fun to
Yeah,
celebrate with people once you've shared a success. So yeah, but it's true that when it's important that everyone in the lab has their own projects. I do enjoy. teamwork a lot more than working by myself for sure.
Oh, that's wonderful. Okay, so I think with that, we can finish this episode. Thank you so much, Charlotte, for accepting the invitation. It was really nice to discuss with you.
You're welcome. This was a very fun time for me. Thank you very much.
And that's the show, folks. If you enjoyed listening, then hit that subscribe button to get the latest updates straight to wherever it is you're listening. Don't forget to rate us on Spotify or Apple and follow us on Twitter at MotionPod. You can find links to things we've just discussed on our website, preprintsandmotion.com. If you'd like to tell us what you think, then send an email, shout at us on Twitter, or shout at us if you see us walking down the street. This has been a JMJ production, generously supported by our friends at ASAP Bio. Until next time, have a good week.
Where do I find out about the different bioarchive licenses? This CC, BY, CDXY nonsense is driving me nuts.
ASAP Bio have a resource for that.
Ugh, that's your answer to everything.
That's because they have everything you need to know about preprints.
Sure, they probably have the basics, like info on the preprint servers, but what else is there?
There's so much more. Looking to post a preprint but not sure what different journal policies are? They have a collection to help you out with that. There are meetings around preprints and associated services. If you want to know how preprint adoption has changed over time, there's even a page on that.
And COVID?
They have a big section on preprints and the pandemic, plus some really cool infographics for communicating preprints.
And university policies? Surely they don't have that.
They collect uni policies where possible.
Okay, they do sound pretty impressive, but is it not a bit of an echo chamber?
It can be, but ASAP Bio also engage with people who don't love preprints and have concerns. So we had an excellent discussion on this very topic a couple of months ago.
Oh, is there anything ASAP Bio don't do?
Honestly, no, they're so nice over there. They were so quick to jump in and support this show. It's your one-stop shop for info on preprints and open science initiatives, so head over to asapbio.org to learn more and subscribe to their newsletter for the latest in preprint news. If you want a deeper dive into the world of preprints, then look out for the next recruitment of ASAP Bio Fellows.